This disaster we have at our border, the disintegration of our national sovereignty, cannot be sustained. Anyone that has two brain cells that could perhaps bump into each other would know that it's abject failure down there. Please feel my spirit and speak truthfully. Step away from your talking points and speak to the American people and own this thing. We're losing our country down there. We need you to resign. Save the country the pain of your impeachment. I have 20 seconds, sir. Please respond.
Congressman, I couldn't disagree with you more when you state that our nation's sovereignty is disintegrating.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island for 5 minutes, Mr. Langevin.
Secretary Mayorkas, I want to focus on election security right now because your department has significant responsibilities for election security, both in terms of managing the risks to election infrastructure and countering mis and disinformation that can certainly undermine Americans' confidence in the electoral process. I know that I have confidence in great leadership at CISA and Director Easterly and the work that she's doing as well. But I want to focus on the fact that Russia obviously has attempted to interfere with U.S. elections before. And I certainly believe that we absolutely have to prepare now more than ever to redouble those efforts, given what's going on in Ukraine. That could be in retaliation for the punishing sanctions that the U.S. enacted for Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Ms. Secretary, can you tell us what the department is doing to shore up election security from Russian cyber interference, give confidence to the committee and the American people that we've got this and we are ready to protect and defend our electoral process?
Congressman, thank you very much. This is one of our priority areas. And as a matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, I engaged with secretaries of state from all over the country to focus our efforts on election security. We are building upon the great work of the former CISA director, Chris Krebs. Jen Easterly is leading, of course, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in this effort. We have just established a Mis- and Disinformation Governance Board in the Department of Homeland Security to more effectively combat this threat, not only to election security, but to our homeland security. We are disseminating information to the secretaries of state. We are counseling them and providing resources to ensure better physical security. We are addressing all aspects of election security, given, of course, the midterm elections that are upon us and the fundamental integrity of our democratic processes that is at stake.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I appreciate you outlining those steps that are being taken. They're important, of course, but let me also turn to the fact that, of course, the scope of Russian cyber threats extends beyond our elections. Also, we know that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks against the United States and our critical infrastructure. President Biden warned against that recently, and is making sure that we have all hands on deck to make sure that our critical infrastructure as well is being protected. But DHS, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency under Director Easterly, of course, plays a major role in not only securing federal networks against these threats, but also coordinating with government and private sectors to secure our critical infrastructure. So in approaching this multifaceted responsibility, DHS through CISA has generated innovative approaches to cybersecurity collaboration, both the interagency and the broader set of public and private sector stakeholders in the cybersecurity ecosystem. I wanted to ask, what can we expect from the department moving forward to maintain and further develop this work? And obviously, there's considerable level of variance across our critical infrastructure. For instance, certain companies have different inherent cybersecurity capacities, use different technologies, and have different levels of significance to national critical functions. How should DHS public-private partnerships account for such variances?
So there's been tremendous work underway, Congressman, in CISA under Jen Easterly's leadership. In the wake of the unprovoked and brutal Russian assault against Ukraine's sovereignty, CISA developed the Shields Up campaign, which is really an effort to disseminate information throughout the private sector with respect to the threat landscape, so that the private sector, which really houses the majority of our nation's critical infrastructure, can have its shields up, can be alert to the threat landscape, can understand the vulnerabilities that exist, and can patch those vulnerabilities and know how to do so. That Shields Up effort is really extraordinary and unprecedented in scope and scale. And we also have been assisted with legislation that does not in any way interfere with the voluntary public-private partnership, but does now, as you well know, given your championship of it, and Ranking Members Katko's championship of it, create a mandatory reporting regime where the federal government, best equipped to understand the homeland security landscape, can be informed of cyber incidents so that we can better protect the private sector.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this most important hearing, you and the ranking member and members of this committee for being here. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here as well. I agree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We have a major challenge at our borders. I just got back again from visiting the border. Been to El Paso many times, San Isidro many more times, and I've kind of grew up in that area. And if I can, I'm going to have the clerk show some photos I took at the San Isidro border crossing of the latest number of refugees that we have at the border crossing. While we get there, let me say that since my time is running, what I observed were 1,000 Ukrainian refugees coming into Tijuana on a daily basis. About 500 of them are actually passed into the U.S. under temporary protective status. And Title 42 is also being waived for them right now to come into the United States. So my question, Mr. Secretary, how do you distinguish one group of refugees from another? Why don't you do the same thing for Afghanistan, Syrians, Africans, Central Americans? I guess my question, bigger question would be, sir, what's our American refugee policy? Now I'd ask to ask for my colleagues here too. The UN yesterday reported that this year 8.3 million Ukrainians will leave Ukraine. What's going to happen when we have 1 million to 2 million Ukrainians knocking at our border? And then, of course, what's going to happen, sir, when we have a few million starving Russians also knocking at our border? And the question really not for you, but for us is, what is our refugee policy in this country? We know what the law is right now, and Title 42 is really something that's been used incorrectly to address immigration at our borders, the refugee issue. This is nothing new. I just read something today that there's discussion now of a Marshall Plan for Central Europe to stabilize that region. Good idea. Why haven't we done that decades ago for Central America? If we have unstable economies that are crashing, we have challenges at the border, and those surges, gentlemen, didn't start this administration. They've been going there for 20, 30 years. Why haven't we acted on those issues? Folks come to our country the way our ancestors came to this country. Economic refugees or political refugees. So, Mr. Secretary, what is our refugee policy when we have 1 million to 3 million Afghanistans, Ukrainians, Russians knocking at our borders? What's our policy? What's the solution? And I want all of us to answer that question. Or do we turn them away? Did we get the photos up? Please answer the question, sir.
Congressman, the President has spoken very powerfully about what our policy is, and that is that we are restoring...
I can address my colleagues. Here's a picture of the Ukrainian refugees at a Tijuana baseball field that the Mexican government graciously made available to these refugees.
We are restoring our leadership in the world as a country of refuge. And in fact, for the Ukrainians who have fled Ukraine in a time of brutal war. We have established a multi-part plan. Number one is our traditional refugee processing, and we deployed refugee affairs officers to the region to administer that. Number two, the Department of State issued guidance with respect to the availability of visas for Ukrainian nationals who qualify. Third, we announced this past Monday, Uniting for Ukraine, a special humanitarian parole program that requires a sponsor here in the United States, which is another lawful and orderly and humane way for Ukrainians to seek refuge in the United States. Those are three different avenues by which Ukrainians seeking refuge can actually obtain it in the United States.
Mr. Secretary, that is in the American tradition of opening our doors to those that are being persecuted, fleeing violence and war. That's what we should do, but it should not be limited just to Ukrainians, Russians, but it should be a blanket policy for the rest of the world. We need those workers. Chambers of Commerce are saying we need that workforce now.